So we're class 96 on the Golden Doves, page 50, and we were talking about how Am Yisrael, like other nations, has a way of encoding information, encoding historical events in the mitzvot. Of course, that's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the messages are encoded in the mitzvot, and then it's up to us when we perform the mitzvah to decode the message, right? So we were talking last time about Sefirat HaOmer, the message encoded in Sefirat HaOmer, that's in class 95. So we're on page 50 now, and we're going to continue studying about this. The encoding and decoding system of the Hebrews is connected with the idea of repetition. It's interesting. Repetition. So we have in the Torah the idea of repetition. So for example, Vishinantam lebanecha, you repeat the text of the Torah to your students, to your children, right? In a successive system, no event can be frozen. Now, part of the idea of repetition in the Jewish mind is because we think in terms of successive synthesis, or rather successive synthesis is a more predominant form of thought. So you have the timeline, right? So in simultaneous synthesis, in contrast, more pagan thinking, things just exist. You stop. There's a static existence, right? But Am Yisrael, we think along the timeline, right? So there's a dynamic reality, and part of that is the repetition of things. And we're going to explain what we mean by repetition. So we don't freeze events, right? Things are always in motion. For example, one may catch a glimpse of the divinity only as it passes. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Of course, there's nothing physical to see. There's nothing physical there, right? But he wants to catch a glimpse of the divinity. So what does the pasuk says? Vaya'avor Adonai al panav. God passes by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And it's as God passes, you catch a glimpse of the divinity after the fact, right? Vaya'avor. A term involving the notion of successiveness, as in the projection of a sound, right? So, vaya'aviru kol b'machaneh. So the sound wave, because sound travels, right? So the sound waves are traveling, right? And that traveling of the sound in the timeline is processed by the mind. And we put together the different components of the sound, and then we understand what the message is, right? So vaya'avor, it's a dynamic concept. After the fact, you can process the information. The object of repetition, therefore, is to record and to transmit. So now we want to record an event. How do we record an event? We record the event in the Pesukim. So the Pasuk, Vaya'avor Adonai al panav vayikra, is recording that event of Vaya'avor. And then we transmit that Pasuk to our children. So that's through repetition, you record the event and you transmit the event. And I'm sorry for the noise, it was raining, and I guess there's still water going down different places here. But the air smells beautiful, Yishtabach Shemo. Really beautiful. It's amazing how wherever you are in the world, the beauty of God's creations is almost always there. All right, continuing. The peculiar form in which the collective mnemonic trace of the Hebrews was recorded and transmitted may be better understood if we consider their attitude toward translation. So now, we want to record, so there's a mnemonic trait, meaning a trace. We have a memory. We have a memory of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's a mnemonic trace, right? We never really remember the event, but there's a mnemonic trace that the event leaves in our psyche, in our collective psyche. Now, if you look at the attitude of Am Yisrael towards translating Pesukim, it's different than the Muslims, it's different than the Christians, and that difference will tell you a lot about how we view the transmission of events and of mnemonic traces. It is a uniquely Jewish concept, and it correlates with the idea of text. So let's study it now. As outlined in the preceding chapter, the Quran is not to be translated. It must be read and transmitted only in the original. So the Quran, according to the Muslims, you may not translate the Quran. By the way, they have nikudot in the Quran, meaning you have the vowels, not nikudot, you have the vowels, the Arabic vowels, you have them in the Quran. It's not like the Jewish Torah, where you just have the consonants, but you don't have the vowels, right? But nevertheless, according to them, you can't, for example, translate the Quran into English, right? Or Swahili, right? Transmission tolerates no change. So here you see that for the Muslims, transmission is ultimately a static thing, right? Right? There is no possibility of transmitting in a way where you're changing. Rather, it's a static point in time, and that static point of time, that static information must somehow be accessed by the reader, right? But there's no change, and that's why there's no translation. Transmission tolerates no change. Taqlid, imitation, right, stipulates that the movement must always be one direction, from the people to the Quran. So the job of the faithful Muslim is to go from where he is to where the text is, and the text is static, and he must always approach that static text, not the other way around. It will never be the text that somehow approaches the Muslim. So it's one direction, right? Okay. We'll see how this is in Am Yisrael soon, right? You already know from the word V'shinantam levanecha that it's not like this, because the word shana means to repeat. You repeat the pasuk to your children. But what does the word shana mean? Leshanot, to change, because when you repeat, it's always going to be a little different. Why is it going to be different? Because your child is different than you, so the way he experiences a pasuk is a little different than the way you experience it. Your child is not you, and you're not your father, and your father is not his father. Everybody has unique experiences in life. So here I am in Brooklyn, and have a set of unique experiences, and I'm in a particular synagogue, in a particular environment, and the way I process the Pesukim in the Torah is from a slightly different perspective, of course. It's different than the perspective, let's say, of my grandfather, Alav Shalom, in Damascus. Right, and then he went to Israel, and he had a set of experiences. So the way he processed the text was a little different. That's why Vishnantam Levanecha is not just transmit, but there's a slight change. Automatically, the person is different, and therefore the text is different in the way it's processed. But let's get back to my father's writing. I just wanted to point that out because so you can kind of jump the gun. Christianity allows translation of the scripture. However, it does not recognize an original text to which a translation is organically connected and ultimately accountable. So interesting, among the Christians, they said, no, you can translate the New Testament into English, into Japanese, into Korean, into whatever language you want to translate it, into Arabic, right? Right? But there's no original text, right? Christianity does not have an officially recognized Hebrew version of the Old Testament. There is no original new even the Old Testament, they don't even have a official version of the Old Testament, right? More significantly, Christianity did not preserve the original Aramaic of the words of Yimach Shemo V'Zichro and early New Testament writings. Not only don't they have an original version of our Tanakh, which they recognize, they don't even have an original version of the New Testament, which should have been in Aramaic. That's the language that Yimach Shemo V'Zichro spoke. Translation here involves the suppression of the original mnemonic trace. So here, you suppress the original text. There is no original text. And I'm sorry for the noise here. There is no original text, right? So the original trace, the original memory is suppressed. And that makes sense because you know that the Christians are very Oedipal. They want to destroy the Old Testament. They want to destroy the original nation of Israel and replace it with a new nation. So you see how the idea of suppressing the mnemonic trace and negating an original text falls perfectly and is aligned perfectly with their thinking. On the other hand, Judaism recognizes an original text of the scripture. Now, Am Yisrael, we have the original letters of the Torah, the Hebrew letters. We count them, right? On the other hand, the Masorah is a rigidly controlled system whereby every word is accountable at the orthographic level. Every word we know how many letters it's supposed to be in the word, what the letters are, whether it's Haser, whether it's Maleh. Some of the letters are bigger than others, like this week's parasha, the Galah. The Gimel is Gimel Rabati, right? On the other hand, I heard a nice perush. Why Gimel Rabati? I thought it was a nice perush. Why a large Gimel? Because even if he has to make 3 Isurim de Oraita, he should do the Giluach. 1 Isur de Oraita is a regular person is not allowed to do Giluach with the Ta. So that's 1 Isur de Oraita, right? The second Isur de Oraita is he could be, if he's a Kohen, right? There's an extra Isur. And the third Isur de Oraita is if he's a Nazir. So even if he has to do 3 Isurim de Oraita, vehit galah, and that's a Gimel Rabati, right? I thought it's a nice explanation. Nevertheless, back to the text. On the other hand, Judaism officially recognizes the translations of the Torah. So even though we have the original text in Hebrew, we know exactly the letters, right? And we preserve this in the Masorah, we allow a translation of the Hebrew. So you see how it's bi-directional. The dictum of Rabbi Yehuda, he who translates a verse in its exact form is an impostor, and he who adds to it is a blasphemer, clearly defines the 2 poles of a translation. It's really interesting. Let me just take a look in the footnotes where Rabbi Yehuda says this, okay? So this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, and it's in footnote 5, Tosefta Megillah. Okay, so the Tosefta Megillah records it of Rabbi Yehuda, who says, again, I'm going to read it a second time. He who translates a verse in its exact form is an impostor. So if you translate the exact form of the original verse, it's pretend. You're an imposter because you can never translate perfectly, because every language has its own nuances, right? So you're an imposter, right? And he who adds to it is a blasphemer. But if on the other hand you're going to add things to the Pesukim that are not there, then that's blasphemy. Clearly, so you see the 2 poles of the translation. On the one hand, you recognize that translation can never be the original text. There's an original text. The translation can never equal the original text perfectly. But on the other hand, when you translate, you better not add things, right? That's blasphemy, right? The rabbinic statement, the second tablets and the pieces of the original tablets were together deposited in the ark, applies within a successive system to the transmission of all texts. So think of it. You have the original Luchot HaBerit. That's Kadosh. But now you have the new Luchot HaBerit. Why put the original one? Because we never get rid of the original text. So even if we're going to, quote-unquote, replace it in the sense that the original is broken, right? But it's always going to be part of the system. It's always going to be part of our thought process, right? It's not like the Christians who just suppress the original, let's go on to the new. No, we never do that. It's not like the Muslims who cannot conceive of a new text, right? They can only have one set of luchot. I mean, not that they have any luchot, by the way. I mean, but point being clear. So the rabbinic statement, the second tablets and the pieces of the original tablets that were together deposited in the ark, applies within a successive system. So there's a certain tension between the first set of luchot and the second set of luchot, and that tension can be resolved through successive synthesis, where you synthesize in your mind one set of luchot broken, second set of luchot not broken, and that tension creates a certain meaning. And this applies to the transmission of all texts. Because again, anytime I read a text, I read it through a unique perspective. even the melodies of the Tamim are not exactly the same, right? Even the melody changes. Perhaps there's a certain pronunciation, something in the pronunciation of words which may change, right? Thus, a text cannot signify the erasure of the trace. So, because we keep the original Luchot HaBerit, the text can never erase the trace. The trace is always there. Rather than suppression of the trace, which is what the Christians do, through repetition, by repeating the text, V'shinantam levanecha, the text, like the Ark of Yor, must contain both the trace and its transformation. So you have the original text, you have the transformation of the text, right? Because the reader is coming from a particular perspective and he can see things perhaps that nobody else before him was able to see, right? Right? But you always have the original Luchot HaBerit, and even if they're broken, they're going to be in the Aron HaKodesh. Repetition directly concerns the concept of creation, transmission of the law, and ritual. That will be the subject for the next class.